Chapter 11, Topic 3, How do we study disease? In this topic, we're going to cover what is epidemiology, important terms in epidemiology, types of sources of infection, and patterns of occurrence. The objectives for this topic are be able to differentiate the science of epidemiology from traditional medical practice, be able to identify the need for some disease being denoted notifiable, be able to define incidence and prevalence, be able to discuss point source, common source, and propagated epidemics, and predict the shape of the epidemic curves associated with each. Let's start off this topic by defining what epidemiology is. Epidemiology is the study of how often and where diseases occur. Remember that disease is a generic term for any deviation from health. This means that epidemiologists look at disease occurrences in a variety of diseases, such as cancer, infectious diseases, and genetic diseases. These epidemiologists are frequently nicknamed disease detectives because they don't actually treat patients. Instead, they track diseases in hopes of determining the cause or, at a minimum, limiting the amount of future diseases. We have a few important terms that must be learned in order to properly discuss epidemiology. The first of these is the most basic of terms, notifiable or reportable diseases. These diseases are those that are reported on the local, state, national, or global level. These are diseases that are tracked and monitored. There are specific rules to making diseases reportable. Typically, these can be very deadly diseases or can be very easily spread and must be monitored closely to limit the spread of the disease. Within the U.S., there are certain reportable diseases, but states can have their own list of reportable diseases as well. Within these notifiable diseases, we have a couple of different terms to discuss. The first of these is prevalence. This is the total number of cases with respect to the population. This helps provide a sense of balance to how frequently the disease is diagnosed within a population. For example, if there is 1 case out of 10 people in a small town, the prevalence is quite high, while in comparison, 1 case out of 1,000 is a low prevalence rate. While prevalence rate is important, the rate of incidences can provide an insight into potential hotspots. The incident rate is the number of new cases over a certain period of time. So this number provides us a little more of a snapshot, while prevalence can tell us the background level of a disease. Mortality rate is fairly obvious, as this is the number of deaths caused by a certain disease. This is important to know because it can indicate how deadly a disease is and may change the policies and procedures within the health department or trigger more investigation. So when an increase in disease is noticed, epidemiologists try to determine what type of infection is causing the disease. There are 3 main types of sources. The first of these is the point source, where a single source exposes many people, then spreads from there. This can be confused easily with common source. This is something that will expose a variety of people, but over a long period of time. So the point source is typically a short duration window or is an actual person, while the common source is something environmental, such as contaminated water that can expose a lot of people over a period of time. Either of these may result in a propagated epidemic, which is when the disease then passed from person to person to create an epidemic. We will explore the concepts of epidemic more on the next slide. There are 4 main types of occurrence with all of these types of sources. All of these will start with an indexed case, which is the first person identified in an investigation. Let's look at each of these. The first of these is endemic occurrence. An endemic is when levels are fairly stable. If these levels are stable within a region, such as the Southwest in this image, it is known as an endemic occurrence. This can be directly compared to the epidemic occurrence, where rates of disease are elevated. Typically, these are elevated in a regional area. So to compare, endemic is stable areas while epidemic occurrences are an increased rate. A sporadic occurrence is one where there are only a few cases that are spread out significantly. This may be what the start of an epidemic occurrence looks like until more diseases are reported. When we see an increase of disease globally, this is labeled a pandemic. In order to be considered a pandemic, there must be increased rates in different continents. For an example, an increase in the cases in the US and Canada wouldn't be a pandemic, but an increase in the rates between the US and Germany would be considered a pandemic. Note that typically this is more than 2 countries, but it must be on 2 or more continents. So, here's a reminder of the learning objectives for this topic. Be able to differentiate the science of epidemiology from traditional medical practice. Be able to identify the need for some diseases being denoted notifiable. Be able to define incidence and prevalence. Be able to discuss point source, common source, and propagated epidemics, and predict the shape of the epidemic curves associated with each.